Yeah, there we go. Okay.
Hello.
Wonderful. Hello once again.
Hello once again. Today we're discussing Englishes, and maybe we'll discuss something about the use of simplifying and some of simplifying English, and maybe some pros and cons of simplifying English.
Well, maybe we could kind of rehash a bit of what we were just talking about since we just recorded the audio segment of this. What was the question you asked me?
Whether it's well, we were discussing
Like
Globish
simplifying
or
English
global
with
English.
European colleagues
Yeah,
or
yeah.
something.
Would you adapt your English? Would you simplify your English to be understood by non-natives? When it comes to not teaching, but simply communicating.
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, yeah, not go, I'm going to speak simpler so that they understand. But what I was saying is I think that if you're surrounded by... Well, actually, I was saying if you're surrounded by people who aren't speakers of your dialect, or if you use like an obscene amount of slang, which many people do, and that's even a problem for me, I think it is quite rude. I don't use a lot of slang, actually, myself. I never have and never do, never will. But I was talking about Americans
Yeah.
who tend to, for example, there was a phrase I remembered. Americans who will say, "Oh, do you want to do this, whatever?" And they'll say something like, "Dig it." And I'm thinking, am I supposed to know what that means? Like, just say yes or no. But that's not even really a matter of like native versus non-native speakers, and more just kind of like the conventions of conversation. I don't really think about if I have a grasp that someone speaks English well enough, then I'm not thinking this person is a non-native, therefore I should do this. I would just speak normally, and if they ask me to slow down or to clarify something, then I would do that for them.
I see.
But it's not purposeful, in
I
answer to
see.
your question, if that helps.
Yeah. How open should we be welcoming different varieties of English, different Englishes? Because some people believe in multiculturalism and they think that we should study, linguists or English teachers should study different varieties of English, like African English, Indian English, Russian English, you name it.
I mean, like, as I was kind of saying before, I think this isn't something that we have any control over anyway. Like, I think it's not like there's people pushing for one versus the other. I mean, like, in terms of like in enough numbers to make an actual to have an influence on that kind of situation. English is a very organic language by its very nature. There is no institute that decides which English is correct and which is not. Like with Spanish, and I think Russian also has this. Spanish has the Real Academia Española, for example. English doesn't have this. It just develops the way it's developing, and theoretically we can talk about it a lot, but I don't think that can change. So there is just English, right? If someone is not open to different kinds of English, whatever that may be, they're just understanding less or closing themselves off to understanding more, which I don't know, maybe is fine. Maybe you can think, I don't want to learn Russian English, I'm never going to Russia. I don't really think there is a Russian
I don't
English
relate
anyway.
to it. I don't like, for example, when we pick and choose different dialects, we also choose their culture and their political attitude, even politics. During our audio part, we discussed something interesting, that is, it's close to impossible to choose some language without just choosing some political stance, because this or that language or this or that dialect is associated, is closely connected in people's minds with some political thing.
I mean, it can be. I don't fully agree with that. Like, I studied Russian at university. It's nothing to do with like Russian politics whatsoever, to be honest with you.
Unless the situation is heated, and then Russian stops being simply Russian of Pushkin or Dostoevsky, but it becomes Russian of Putin or somebody else, and then people. And it's not just about Russian. It can be any language. Yeah. So, for example, I for one know some Brits who would say that I don't relate to English because I don't like English or British policy or British politics or whatever. So that's why.
What do you mean? Like they don't
I mean
relate
that
to
they
English
disagree
how?
with their colonial attitude, just. And when it comes to colonial and this term colonial and post-colonial, etc. Again, maybe do you think that some English teachers will have to justify their choice of so-called standard British English or standard American English instead of teaching simply Brazilian English or Russian English?
But Brazilian English and
politically?
Russian English aren't real things that exist.
Okay,
That's not like-
let it be African English, like botched African English. Sorry for the use of botched, but I'm a bit of a nativist.
Botched, do you mean?
Botched, yeah.
I mean, I know African teachers here who's teaching their native language. It's not really any different to mine.
Well, their English can be different.
But can you give like concrete examples of that?
There are gazillions of examples. You can find them on YouTube again.
Yeah, but I
like
know
African or Indian English teachers teaching English, like comedy YouTube videos.
That's quite cherry picking people with poor English. I know African English teachers here and they don't speak any different to me. So I don't think there really is such a concept, for example, of Brazilian English or like Russian English. It's just not like an actual thing that exists.
But when it comes to politics, people, again, they advocate multiculturalism. They advocate for inclusiveness, and they might say something like, "We should be more welcoming," and that's why our language, our variety of English, our Englishes, generally speaking, are not inferior to yours. So why should you, as a native teacher, teach us some English? Because we can also teach you our own variety of English. Like teachers of Runglish might say something like, well, we have our own Runglish.
But is this a real thing that's happening though? Because I can't see how this is like, how this corresponds to reality. I get what you're like saying theoretically, but is there anyone who's actually doing this? Because I've never encountered this.
Well, when it comes to especially English teachers, some of them can have an argument over this issue. For example, some believe that, like Chomsky believes that there are some innate structures in our brain, and that's why natives will be always better than non-natives, because we inherit some of our grammar, which I disagree with, by the way.
Oh yeah, this is something we mentioned.
Because we become
too,
humans only when we pick up some language, and we do not learn any language, or we do not acquire any language in utero, so to speak. And that's why, we do not have our language in our genes. I don't think so. At least I don't think so.
No.
But Chomsky thinks so. But on the other hand, we have some linguists like Hugh Della who advocates non-natives, and again he says that we should be more welcoming, and he opposes native English teachers in a sense. He says that we should be more welcoming, and we have to, he says, he refers to native English teachers. We should learn from non-native English teachers, etc., etc. And again, when it comes to political explanation of this or that English, when it comes to Englishes, I can imagine some situation when some non-native English teachers will say something like, we should be more welcoming to our cultures, to our varieties of English, and we can teach you our own variety of English. Like some seminars, organizing some seminars in Runglish, for example, or Singlish, etc.
My point is, Runglish isn't a thing. Like, that's not a variety of English. It would just be English spoken with errors. So I get the idea. I mean, if people ever want to understand something, that I think it's okay. I think there's a point where it's just like discussing for the sake of discussing. But like, for example, Runglish isn't a thing. It's just people speaking English.
Singlish.
Which is what?
Singapore English, which has its own pronunciation features,
Aren't they?
linguistic features. Yes, English.
Yeah, but aren't they actual native English speakers?
Well, they are seen as native English
It's a
speakers.
bit different.
And
Russians
there are different
are not.
native English speakers, like you might call them like standard or traditional native English speakers born by native English speakers. Or sometimes, for example, there can be a German and Malaysian parent, a German parent and a Malaysian parent, and they will grow and raise their child in English as lingua franca, and their child living in Emirates,
Yeah.
and their child will speak some weird variety of English, which will be their mother tongue, the child's mother tongue, because it's the only language the child can speak, which is interesting. And in this day and age, we have different so-called lingua mamas. Have you heard of lingua mamas in Russia? So Russian teachers of English raise their kids in English only, and of course, they expose them to English cartoons, native English cartoons, hopefully. But on the other hand, they teach them some Runglish, because they speak Runglish, some of them. Some of them speak English, but
what
most
is
of them speak
Runglish?
Runglish is a variety of English with typical mistakes made by Russians.
Yeah, I think this is not that widespread to be even using the term like this. I get it, but you know.
Yeah, it has its own grammatical features, lexical features, typical pronunciation mistakes, you name it. And when they raise a child speaking only one language, which can hardly be called standard English, it will be interesting to deal with such a child. And in this world where we have more non-native English speakers than native English speakers, it's not impossible to imagine a situation when we will end up with people speaking absolutely different Englishes.
Well, I don't think there's anything we can do about that. So,
Should we do anything about it?
like, what? What can you do?
Should we separate politics from language?
I don't
for
think
example?
politics is involved with language.
It is involved.
It's involved, but I don't think it's not to the extent that you were saying, where your politics influence the dialect you choose. Not absolutely not in my case. It's more about interest in media. Maybe for older people, but
Maybe
for young
Hugh Della,
people.
who's
Maybe, yeah.
accused for his.
But I don't think it's.
political views.
I don't think that's widespread enough to make that as kind of like a concrete statement. I think we'll have to talk about this next time. All right. Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, and enjoy your English.
Yeah, enjoy your English.
Have a good one.
Off we go.
Bye.
There we go.